kept my hands folded in my lap so no one could see them shaking. My stepfather sat 3 feet away from me, close enough that I could smell his cologne, and he was smiling. That calm, practiced smile he always wore when he thought he had already won something. He had no idea what was inside the envelope the attorney was holding. My grandmother passed on a Tuesday in late October. I know that sounds like the kind of detail that shouldn't matter, but it does to me because October was her month. She loved the cold coming back in, the smell of the leaves, the way the light went gold in the afternoons. She always said October felt like a beginning, not an end. I think about that now. I think she would have chosen it on purpose if she could. Her name was June. Everyone called her that, just June, and she had this way of making a room feel smaller and warmer the moment she walked into it. She was 81 years old when she died, and she had lived alone in the same house in western Pennsylvania for the last 14 years, ever since my grandfather passed. A 4-bedroom colonial on 2 acres, with a detached garage my grandfather had converted into a workshop, and a kitchen garden she still kept herself every spring. She drove herself to the grocery store until she was 79. She did her own taxes. She read 2 books a week and had opinions about all of them. She raised me mostly. That part matters too. My mother left when I was 6. Not dramatically. No fight, no door slamming, no police involved. She just stopped coming back. She called sometimes, then less, then almost never. By the time I was 8, my grandmother had filed for legal guardianship, and that was that. My grandfather was still alive then, and the two of them made a life for me that was steady and quiet and full in ways I didn't have words for until I was much older. My grandfather taught me to fix things. My grandmother taught me to read contracts and never sign anything I didn't understand. She said those were the 2 most useful skills a person could have. I grew up, went to college in Pittsburgh, came back, got a job doing billing and accounts management for a medical group 30 minutes from my grandmother's house. I drove out to see her every Sunday. We ate dinner, watched whatever she had recorded on her DVR, and argued gently about books. It was the most ordinary thing in the world, and I did not take it for granted, not for a single Sunday. My mother came back into the picture when I was 22. She had remarried, a man named Ray, and they had moved to Ohio, and she wanted, as she put it, to reconnect. I was cautious. My grandmother was more cautious than me. But she never turned my mother away, because that was not who she was. She let her visit, she was polite, she kept her distance. Ray was the one who worried me more than my mother did. He was the kind of man who laughed too readily and remembered everyone's name after one meeting and always seemed to know the square footage of whatever house you were talking about. He sold commercial real estate. He was good at it. He wore a watch that cost more than my monthly rent, and he had the handshake of someone who had practiced it in a mirror. The first time I met him, he spent 45 minutes asking my grandmother questions about her property, the acreage, the garage, whether the lot could be subdivided, and he called it making conversation. My grandmother waited until he left, and then she said very quietly, "That man has already decided what he wants." She was right. She was always right. She updated her will 2 years before she died. I didn't know the full details at the time. She told me she had met with her attorney, a woman named Ellen Marsh, and that everything was in order, and that I should not worry. I didn't push. It felt wrong to ask. She was still healthy, still driving, still reading 2 books a week. And I didn't want to have a conversation that made her feel like I was already thinking about what came after. I wish I had asked, not for the money, just to understand sooner how much she had thought about all of it. She was diagnosed with congestive heart failure 18 months before she died. It progressed faster than anyone expected. By the last spring, she was using a walker and sleeping more and asking me to come on Wednesdays too, not just Sundays. I came every Wednesday. I took half days at work when I needed to and used up all my PTO, and when that ran out, I talked to my manager and figured it out. I don't say that to sound noble. I say it because my mother and Ray also knew she was sick, and their visits in that last year could be counted on one hand. She died on a Tuesday in October, in her own bed, with me holding her hand. 3 days later, my mother called me to ask when the will reading was scheduled. The estate attorney, Ellen Marsh, had an office in a converted Victorian on the main street of the nearest town. It was the kind of office that felt deliberate. Built-in bookshelves, natural light, no fluorescent fixtures. She had been my grandmother's attorney for over a decade. She was 60 or so. Calm in the way of someone who had seen every version of this particular situation and was not surprised by any of them. The reading was scheduled for 11 in the morning, 2 weeks after the funeral. I arrived early. I sat in the waiting room and looked at my hands and thought about nothing useful. My mother and Ray arrived 7 minutes late. She was wearing a black dress that seemed too formal for 11 in the morning. Ray had a legal pad, an actual legal pad, yellow, with a pen clipped to the top. He set it on the table in front of him when they sat down, and I watched him uncap the pen, and I felt something cold move through my chest. There was also my grandmother's younger brother, my great-uncle Ted, who was 74 and had driven up from Virginia and seemed mostly confused about the logistics but wanted to be present. I was glad he was there. He smelled like wood smoke, and he had my grandmother's eyes, and just seeing him made the room feel slightly less like a transaction. Ellen Marsh came in, set a folder on the table and said, "Thank you all for being here. I want to start by saying that your mother and grandmother was one of the most thorough and intentional clients I have ever worked with. She thought carefully about every decision in this document, and I want you to understand that before I begin." My mother smiled the way people smile when they think they already know the ending. Ray kept his pen ready. The house and the 2 acres were to be held in a family trust, managed by me, with the intent of remaining in the family. It could not be sold or subdivided without a majority agreement of the named beneficiaries and a 60-day mediation period. Ray's pen stopped moving. He looked at my mother. She kept her smile, but it went a little rigid at the edges. The contents of the workshop, all the tools, the woodworking equipment, everything my grandfather had accumulated over 40 years, were to go to my great-uncle Ted, who let out a sound that was almost a sob, and then immediately apologized for it. The financial accounts. My grandmother had been careful with money her entire life. She had lived modestly, driven used cars, kept the same kitchen appliances for 20 years. She had also, quietly and steadily, invested. The total came to approximately $1.6 million in liquid assets, not counting the estimated property value. Of that, my mother was to receive $85,000, specifically noted as the full repayment of loans made over the course of 18 years, documented and logged, with the note that my grandmother considered that debt settled and held no grievance over it. Ray wrote something on his legal pad. The remainder, after a $20,000 gift to my great-uncle and a charitable bequest to a local literacy nonprofit my grandmother had supported for years, was to come to me. My mother said, "That can't be right." Ellen Marsh looked at her without any particular expression and said, "I can read it again if you'd like." She was my mother said, and her voice had a quality I didn't recognize, like something thin being pulled too tight. "I am her daughter. There must be a mistake." "There is no mistake," Ellen Marsh said. "Your mother was of sound mind and met with me on 4 separate occasions to finalize and review this document. She also left a letter of instruction which I have here addressed to all beneficiaries, which I am required to read aloud." Ray put his hand on my mother's arm. She shook it off. The letter was 2 pages, handwritten, and Ellen Marsh read every word of it. My grandmother's voice was in every sentence. Her directness, her lack of sentimentality about facts, her deep and obvious love underneath all of it. She wrote about my grandfather, about what they had built together, about what it meant to them to do it themselves. She wrote about my mother, not with anger. She was very clear about that. She said she had made peace with the distance long ago, but with honesty. She wrote that the loans had been given freely and forgiven freely and that the $85,000 represented that chapter being closed, not a punishment. And then she wrote about me. She wrote that I had shown up, Sunday after Sunday, Wednesday after Wednesday, year after year, not because anyone asked me to, but because I wanted to. She wrote that real family is proven in the ordinary moments, not the ones that have something at stake. She wrote that she had watched me my whole life and she was not surprised by who I had become, but she was grateful, and she wanted me to have every resource she had built so I could keep building. She ended the letter with a line I will never forget. She wrote, "I did not choose who came first, but I always knew who stayed." My mother stood up. She said very quietly, "We'll be contesting this." Ray was already on his phone. The contest filing came 6 weeks later. The grounds, as laid out by the attorney they had hired, were that my grandmother had been unduly influenced in the years before her death, that her declining health had affected her judgment, and that I, her primary caregiver, had used that access to steer the estate in my favor. I read the filing 3 times, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold. I read the word manipulation applied to what I had done, which was drive 40 minutes each way twice a week for 4 years and hold my grandmother's hand while she died. I called Ellen Marsh. She was not rattled. She told me this was not uncommon. She told me they had very little ground to stand on given the documentation, 4 separate will revisions over 5 years, each notarized, each with a different physician's note confirming my grandmother's mental competency. She told me my grandmother had anticipated exactly this possibility. She told me, Ellen said, that she expected a challenge. She said, and she wanted me to tell you this directly if it came to it. She said, I have taken care of it. The deposition process began 3 months after the filing. I had to account for every visit, every phone call, every decision I had made related to her care. My mother's attorneys tried to suggest that I had isolated her, that I had limited her contact with my mother. I submitted phone records. I submitted the visitor log from her physician's office. I submitted the texts, dozens of them, where I had explicitly told my mother about appointments, about her status, about windows where she would have welcomed a visit. There was one exchange in particular. About 8 months before my grandmother died, I had texted my mother saying that the cardiologist wanted to have a family meeting and asking if she could come. She had responded 4 days later saying that Ray had a conference that weekend and they would try to make the next one. There was no next one. The mediation session was scheduled for a Thursday morning in February, nearly 5 months after the initial filing. Gray winter light, a conference table, everyone in business clothes. My mother looked tired. Ray looked like he was running a negotiation, which I suppose he was. My grandmother's estate had complied with every single discovery request. Ellen Marsh had organized 14 years of documented communications, financial records, physician's notes, and notarized revisions into binders that were, frankly, beautiful in their completeness. My grandmother had logged every loan, every repayment attempt, every instance of money requested and given. She had kept receipts and records and dates going back to when I was a child. The mediator went through the documents for 2 hours. Then Ray's attorney asked for a recess. They came back 40 minutes later and my mother's attorney said they were withdrawing the contest. No counteroffer, no negotiation. Just they were withdrawing. I found out later, through Ellen, that the document binders had included something my mother's attorneys had not anticipated. A recorded conversation made legally with proper consent protocols in the state of Pennsylvania between my grandmother and Ellen Marsh, dated approximately 3 weeks before my grandmother's death, in which my grandmother clearly and coherently explained every decision in the will, named each beneficiary, and stated explicitly that she anticipated a challenge and was documenting her intentions accordingly. She had thought of everything. That is so entirely who she was. It's been 14 months. I still live 40 minutes from the house, which is still standing on its 2 acres with the converted workshop and the kitchen garden. I went out in April and planted the garden the way she taught me. Tomatoes in the back, herbs along the south-facing wall, zucchini that always produces more than any one person can reasonably use. I have not done anything dramatic with the money. I paid off my car. I have met with a financial planner twice. I donated to the same literacy nonprofit she supported because it seemed right to continue something she started. My mother and I have not spoken since the mediation. I don't know what I would say, and I am no longer sure the conversation needs to happen. I spent a long time feeling guilty about that, the way you feel guilty about things you didn't actually do wrong. I'm working on it. My great-uncle Ted drove up in June with his son to go through the workshop. They spent 2 days there. Before he left, he sat with me on the back porch and we drank iced tea, and he told me stories about my grandmother when she was young. How she had been the sharp one, the funny one, the one their mother always said would either run a company or run a revolution. He said he wasn't surprised she had prepared the way she had. He said she had never in her life left anything to chance. I asked him if he thought she knew, in the end, what was going to happen with the contest. He thought about it for a second. Then he said, "She knew what everybody in that room was going to do before they did it. She always did. That's just who June was." I drove home that evening with the windows down. The air smelled like cut grass and something faintly sweet from a neighbor's flowering tree, and the sky was doing that thing it does in summer where it turns 3 different colors before the light finally lets go. I thought about how she had sat with her attorney 4 separate times, making sure every line was right. I thought about the letter and that last sentence. I did not choose who came first, but I always knew who stayed. She had been telling me that my whole life, in every Sunday dinner and every Wednesday afternoon, in every moment she stayed up to call me when I had a hard day, or drove an hour to see me graduate, or saved the newspaper clippings about things she thought I would find interesting. She had just found a way, at the very end, to put it in writing. "I think I will be okay. More than okay, eventually. I just miss her. I miss her every single day, and no amount of anything else changes that. And I think she would tell me that's exactly how it's supposed to feel." There's a moment in that conference room I keep coming back to. Not when my mother stood up. Not when Ray's pen stopped moving. It was earlier, when Ellen Marsh said, before she read a single line, that my grandmother was one of the most thorough and intentional clients she had ever worked with. I remember feeling something release in my chest when she said that, like I had been holding my breath for months without knowing it. I think about what it actually takes to do what my grandmother did, not the legal part, the human part. She knew, probably for years, that the moment she died someone would try to undo what she had built. She knew her own daughter well enough to predict exactly how it would unfold, and instead of being bitter about that or pretending it wouldn't happen, she just quietly made sure it couldn't. 4 meetings with an attorney. A recorded conversation. 14 years of logged loans and documented communications. A letter written in her own handwriting that said everything she needed to say. That's not luck, that's character. The kind you build over a lifetime by telling the truth even when it's inconvenient, by keeping your word especially when no one is watching, by treating every ordinary obligation, a Sunday dinner, a Wednesday drive, a phone call at the right moment, like it matters. Because it does. It all does. My mother made different choices. I don't say that with anger anymore mostly. She chose Ray's conference over the cardiologist meeting. She chose to respond to my text 4 days late. She chose over and over the thing that was easier or more comfortable or more immediately useful to her. And then she chose to file a legal contest claiming I had manipulated a woman who, as it turned out, had been several moves ahead of everyone in that room the entire time. What happened to my mother wasn't punishment from some outside force. It was just the natural result of who she had been and what she had done, compounding quietly over years. Until one February morning it was all sitting in a conference room in organized binders, and there was nothing left to dispute. I think the hardest thing I have had to learn, and I am still learning it, is that showing up consistently without drama, without an audience, without any guarantee of recognition, is its own kind of strength. It doesn't feel like strength when you're doing it. It feels like just another Wednesday. It feels like burning PTO and eating cold leftovers in a car and sitting in waiting rooms reading the same magazines 3 times. It doesn't feel like anything except what you do because it's the right thing to do. But it accumulates. Every single bit of it accumulates. My grandmother knew that. She lived it. And in the end, she found a way to show me that she had seen every Wednesday, every Sunday, every Sunday, every small, unglamorous moment of it, and that it had meant something. I did not become the person I am because I expected a reward. I became that person because she showed me, from the time I was very small, what it looks like to do things right even when it costs you. That is the only inheritance that was never in any document, and it is also the one that no one can contest. I still plant the garden in April. I still drive out to the house. I still miss her every day in a way that doesn't get smaller, just more familiar. And I think that's how you know something was real.